The Robert Bork nomination ended today. The Senate voted by an overwhelming 58-42 margin to reject the controversial appointment. Judy Woodruff ends our special coverage of the Bork story. Judy?
The fact that the outcome of the vote was expected all along didn't make the final hours of the Bork debate any less contentious. Right down to the wire, Bork supporters continued to charge that their man had been grossly maligned by the opposition, while critics insisted that a fair airing of Bork's views had taken place. At several points during today's debate on the Senate floor, Judiciary Committee Chairman, Democrat Joseph Biden, responded heatedly to statements like this one from Republican Senator James McClure.
There are members of this body who are desperate, absolutely desperate, to keep from the American people the real story of what has happened here, just as the real record of Robert Bork has been kept from the American people. If our constituents only knew, if they only knew how few of us took the time to look at the record before leaping to opposition, if they only knew how some of us walked onto this floor and parroted the very same distortions and lies that were exploded as false during the hearings and before and after the hearings. If they only knew how cowardly the submission to interest group pressure has been. If they only knew how all the contrived excuses and rationalizations have been used to explain negative votes. If they knew, I think a lot of us wouldn't be here after the next election. So it's vital to keep up the front. The opponents of Judge Bork have to stick by their guns and stick together. There is safety in numbers. Wolves know it, and interest groups know it, and senators apparently know it.
40 million people watched him. He spoke. I time and again raised the gavel and said, "Are you certain, Judge, you've had enough time to respond to the questions?" And when it was all over, I said to Judge Bork, "Now, Judge Bork, do you think you got a fair hearing?" He said, "Yes." "Anything else you want to say, Judge Bork?" "No." "Anything at all you want to clarify?" "No." Then the public opinion polls were taken, and then the American people said Judge Bork should not be in the court. That should not in any way direct us here how we should vote. I don't care if all the American people say he shouldn't be on the court. If I thought he should be, I would vote for him on the court, and vice versa. That's my responsibility, my sworn responsibility. But this notion, I heard this morning, lynch mobs, I heard from another senator this morning, $15 million ad campaigns. Where I come from, they call that making things up out of whole cloth. It's bizarre. It's ridiculous. Look at the record.
The man's been trashed in our House. Some of us helped generate the trashing. Others of us yielded to it. But all of us, myself included, all of us have been accomplices to it. All of us who haven't spoken out have been accomplices to it. All of us who have sat there, not just members of the committee, but members of the Senate, and let these ads go on, and let this trashing go on, and let this good man be characterized as some sort of Frankenstein's monster without raising a voice against it. All of us are accomplices.
It seems to me what the senator is indicting is less the process than the Senate. For if the senator is suggesting that 50, I predict 57, possibly 58 of our colleagues today who are going to vote against Judge Bork are doing so because they have succumbed to the raw pressure wherever it was generated. It seems to me that's one heck of an indictment of your colleagues. Because if you insist that that's the reason they're voting why they did, not because of the caliber of the testimony and the people who testified against him, not because of his record, then it seems to me that the indictment is not so much of the system, but the indictment is of the lack of courage of individual members of the Senate. And that, to me, is an awfully, awfully, awfully strong indictment. I'm not being facetious when I say this. I have a higher opinion of the ability of my colleagues to do what's right than apparently the senator from Missouri does.
I would only say, Mr. President, that in my judgment, this process has been comparable to the repeal of withholding on interest and dividends in judicial form, really. And did we at that time hear from our constituents? Yes. And did we decide the issue on the basis of what we heard from our constituents? Yes, we did. And does that apply now? Yes, it does. And are we politicians? Yes, we are. And is that an indictment of members of the Senate? Maybe. Maybe. But I think it's an accurate description of what happened.
I think what we really have to determine, and I hope the American people now understand, that the real debate has been over the proper philosophy of judging, and debate about whether our course for the future will be charted by unaccountable judges or elected representatives of the people. And finally, I hope that everyone now understands the real Judge Bork, the exceptional jurist and the very good and decent man whose outstanding record demonstrates that he is uniquely qualified for service on our nation's highest court. And some have risen during this debate to praise Judge Bork, and others have risen to bury him. And I rise as a former leader of the Senate to thank him. There was the danger that the constitutional responsibility of this body, the responsibility of advice and consent, would be short-circuited. But by his courageous refusal to throw in the towel, to quietly walk away, Judge Bork guaranteed that the Senate would live up to its responsibility.
We all need to begin to look down the road toward the next nominee. And it is time to start the healing. I urge the President to back away from a policy of defiance. And I urge that we all back away from a policy of defiance. So, Mr. President, it's time to move ahead, to begin the process of clearing the air, and to look forward to filling the vacancy on the court. Let the dead past bury its dead.
As we reported earlier, the final vote was 58 to 42 against confirmation.